Hi, this is Andre, and thanks for checking out Synthisophy. Synthisophy is scientifically integrating the wisdoms of history, based on fact and truth, into our present culture. Let's take a look today at Chapter 19, Smoke and Hot Air. More specifically, smoke, mirrors, and hot air. So note that the following will be quotes from Smoke, Mirrors, and Hot Air. How ExxonMobil uses big tobacco's tactics to manufacture uncertainty on climate science. This is from the Union of Concerned Scientists, January 2007, with more commentary added by myself. So here's the executive summary of Smoke, Mirrors, and Hot Air. Quote, in an effort to deceive the public about the reality of global warming, ExxonMobil has underwritten the most sophisticated and most successful disinformation campaign since the tobacco industry misled the public about the scientific evidence linking smoking to lung cancer and heart disease. As this report documents, the two disinformation campaigns are strikingly similar. ExxonMobil has drawn upon the tactics that even some of the organizations and actors involved in the callous disinformation campaign the tobacco industry waged for 40 years. Like the tobacco industry, ExxonMobil has manufactured uncertainty by raising doubts about even the most indisputable scientific evidence, adopted a strategy of information laundering by using seemingly independent front organizations to publicly further its desired message and thereby confuse the public. Promoted scientific spokespeople who misrepresent peer-reviewed scientific findings or cherry-pick facts in their attempts to persuade the media and the public that there is still serious debate among scientists that burning fossil fuels has contributed to global warming and that human-caused warming will have serious consequences. Attempted to shift the focus away from meaningful action on global warming with misleading charges about the need for sound science. Used its extraordinary access to the Bush administration to block federal policies and shape government policies on global warming. Here's what has happened under the Trump administration regarding fossil fuel and climate change. Pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. Relaxed restrictions on coal power plant emissions. Relaxed fuel efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions benchmarks for cars and trucks. Open vast stretches of land and water offshore to oil and gas drilling. No longer require oil and gas companies to install monitors that detect methane leaks. Open Keystone XL pipelines that will increase the flow of tar sands oil from Canada. So let's look at some of the history regarding fossil fuels. The year 1998 marked an important milestone for scientific certainty concerning climate change. In that year, James Hansen, a leading climate scientist and director of the Institute for Space Studies at NASA, testified before Congress that scientific data had confirmed humans' role in climate change. It was also in 1988 that the United Nations formed the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the U.S. Congress introduced the National Energy Policy Act of 1998 in an effort to reduce emissions of heat-trapping gases. By that year, the well-established science of global warming was making front-page headlines, as is shown in this New York Times article. Which states, more or less, we can see that the issue of global warming has moved from the area of science to the national stage. Note, global warming has begun, expert tells Senate. Sharp cut in burning of fossil fuels is urged to battle shift in climate. global warming, greenhouse effect, looking at the data over the last 100 years, we can see the average temperature on the Earth has increased. If we note at the bottom, summary statement, by 1988, climate change was a well-established scientific fact and widely acknowledged in the public sphere, as exemplified by this front page story in the New York Times reporting on Dr. James Hansen's testimony before Congress. It's difficult to think that executives, lobbyists, and scientists at the major fossil fuel companies were by this time unaware of the scientific evidence of the risks associated with the continued burning of their products. Actually, half of industrial carbon emissions have been released since 1988. Although the Industrial Revolution began more than 250 years ago, more than half of all industrial carbon emissions have been released since 1988, after major fossil fuel companies knew about the harm that their products were causing. We can look in greater detail at this diagram and see, in yellow, before 1988, there were 737 gigatons of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere. Since 1988, and only here up to 2005, 743 gigatons of CO2 has been emitted. And it's probably significantly more than that, seeing as now we're in 2020. Imagine where that graph is going now. The following is a summary statement of the climate deception dossiers, titled Documenting Fossil Fuel Companies' Climate Deception, written by Elliot Nedgen, again from the Union of Concerned Scientists, summer of 2015. Their opening statement: leaked internal memos reveal a coordinated, decades-long disinformation campaign. Quote, one eye-opening document reveals that scientific experts commissioned by the Global Climate Coalition, which was a coalition of 50 U.S. corporations and trade groups, including BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Shell, warned that heat-trapping gases were indeed causing global warming. Regardless, the Global Climate Coalition continued to conduct a multi-million-dollar lobbying and public relations campaign to undermine national and international efforts to address global warming. One of the Global Climate Coalition's backgrounders for legislators and journalists, for example, claimed that the role of greenhouse gases in climate change is not well understood, and emphasized that scientists differ on the issue. But the 17-page internal 1995 Global Climate Coalition primer, written by the company's own scientists, states the scientific basis for the greenhouse effect and the potential impact of human emissions of greenhouse gases such as CO2 on climate is well established and cannot be denied. The primer's lead author, Leonard S. Burstein, a staff scientist at Mobil Oil during that time, would later participate as lead author in the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports in 2001 and 2007. 3 years later, the American Petroleum Institute set up what is called the Global Climate Science Communications Team to try to derail the Kyoto Protocol, the 1997 international agreement signed by 192 countries, but not the United States, to to meet binding carbon emissions reduction targets. A leaked 1998 campaign memo from this team, co-written by representatives of the American Petroleum Institute and members thereof, such as Chevron and Exxon, laid out a roadmap for climate deception largely based on the tobacco industry strategy to stave off government regulation by deceiving the public about smoking hazards. Echoing that strategy, encapsulated in the notorious internal tobacco industry memo claiming, "Doubt is our product." Here is their leaked 1998 campaign memo laying out their roadmap for climate deception. Global Climate Science Communications Action Plan. Project goal: a majority of the American public, including industry leadership, recognizes that the significant uncertainties exist in climate science, and therefore raises questions among those, for example Congress, who chart the future U.S. course on global climate change. Progress will be measured toward this goal. A measurement of public's perspective on climate science will be taken before the plan is launched, and the same measurement will be taken at one or more as yet to be determined intervals as the plan is implemented. Victory will be achieved when average citizens understand, recognize uncertainties in climate science. Recognition of uncertainties becomes part of the conventional wisdom. Media understands, recognizes uncertainties in climate science. Media coverage reflects balance on climate science and the recognition of the validity of viewpoints that challenge the current conventional wisdom. Industry senior leadership understands uncertainties in climate science, making them stronger ambassadors to those who shape climate policy. Those promoting the Kyoto Treaty on the basis of extant science appears to be out of touch with reality. So, their current reality, as they are pitching, unless climate change becomes a non-issue, meaning that the Kyoto proposal is defeated and there are no further initiatives to thwart the threat of climate change, there may be no moment when we can declare victory for our efforts. What does this mean? What it means is, spanning nearly 3 decades, those documents, along with many others, reveal that the world's largest fossil fuel companies, BP, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, coal giant Peabody, and Shell, were fully aware of the reality of climate change, but continue to spend tens of millions of dollars to sow doubt and promote contrarian arguments they knew to be wrong. Taken together, the documents show that these 6 companies, in conjunction with the American Petroleum Institute and a host of other front groups, have colluded to intentionally deceive the public. Their corporate officials have known for at least 3 decades that their products are harmful, and their disinformation campaign continues today, despite the fact that most of the companies now publicly acknowledge the reality of human-caused climate change. Have you seen the ExxonMobil blue-green algae commercial? Which is simply cover for their main industry, fossil fuels. Here it is. Look at all the algae in those flasks. Here's the reality. From documentation of world energy consumption by fuel, Fossil fuels make up 86% of energy consumption in the world. Hydroelectric, 7%. Nuclear, 4%. What about biofuels, like green algae? They make up 0.5%. So obviously, for ExxonMobil, it's cover. They're making all their money off of fossil fuels. As the evidence presented shows, the fossil fuel industry is another malignant, cancerous skinwalker that metaphorically started as particular companies, the cells, within a particular industry, an organ that has metastasized now, involving all nations, and is the cause of climate change that is now impacting the entire Earth, the host, at tremendous cost. The fossil fuel industry is making billions of dollars with their deceit, while killing their own, causing global warming and climate change, with increased CO2 levels in the atmosphere, which result in global temperature rise, warming oceans, shrinking ice sheets and glacier retreat, extreme weather events like hurricanes and droughts, and ocean acidification. Increased CO2 levels in the atmosphere are wreaking havoc on the planet, the total costs of which have yet to be determined and will only be determined in the near future.